In this session, I want to talk about what people at work can do about someone who's displaying narcissistic tendencies. Bear in mind there's a massive gap on the spectrum between those who are doing it some of the time and those who are at the furthest end of NPD. Now, I think in the old days, as when I was much more active in the business world, I think it was just, that was the culture, that was the way things were. It was a tough, sort of hard world of that stuff, where you got used to being shouted out and being criticised and being ridiculed. And I'm pleased to say that I think that was then and this is now. So I think there's a much, lower tolerance of that stuff. But that said, there is still, I would suggest, an unconscious support of some of these people, because many of the qualities that they have are the same qualities of leadership. So they're very confident, they're drivers, they've got great selling skills, they've got energy, they've got charm, they don't put up with nonsense. So these are qualities that the company really wants to have. And so often, because of this, they're often quite high ranking, high achievers who are valued by the organisation. And because of that, they really don't want to let them go. And they can potentially, not saying all the time, turn a bit of a blind eye to it. Or what they'll do, they'll try to manage it, like, so they'll go and have a quiet word with them and say, hey, look, Bob, just calm it a bit. Just cool it down a bit, please, And of course, they'll say, oh yeah, of course I will. But the trouble is, it ain't going to happen. Because you've got to remember, this behaviour is so deeply wired into them due to their deep lack of self-esteem, that this is their massive defence system. So unless you deal with the underlying fundamental issue, these strategies, these acting outs are still going to happen, unless there's a proper degree of intervention. So you can't just talk about it, and nor can you discipline it out. These need to be psychologically managed and not just somebody sent a letter. That is not going to work. If a company is really going to take care of its people, it's really got to do it in a deeply responsible way and really help them get through this stuff. And it is got to be done by helping them rather than putting all the onus back onto them. And I'll come on to that in a minute. Now, so many people just put up with it, or they shift out, because whistleblowing is so difficult in many organisations still, because their career is on the line, they've got their mortgage, etc. So either sort of put up, shut up, or ship out. That's going to be the roles. And often, if there's been sort of no perceived action in the past in the organisation about doing this stuff, people think, well, I'm not going to achieve anything. I'm going to take the risk. And the trouble is that when that happens, it just allows that person to keep doing it and keep getting away with it. So we do need to call it. So an organisation does need to make sure it's a really safe space for them to come and report stuff into. And there's a guaranteed anonymity, which is always quite difficult. Because the person, when called up, I say, well, what's the evidence of this? And they say, it must have been Jessica who said that then. And they've got to be protected themselves in the organisation, if they do that stuff. But the reality is, at some point in time, all the good that person brings in with their leadership qualities can get a point where they're doing more harm than good. And that's the point when an organisation must, out of ethics, respond and do something about it. Now, it's not for me to say what's the right way of doing it, but I think there's something about a package of care. It's very easy just to sort of pay them off, send them out in the world, but you're not going to make them any better for the next company they land into. I think it's the beholden upon a company to say, there is an issue here and we want to help you get better from it. And fundamentally, I think, of course I would say this, you've got to invest in them. You've got to give them at least a year's worth, I would suggest, of psychotherapy, because that's the only real way you're going to break through this stuff. And in some ways, I think a company does need to call it, because I often say, very often in the therapy world, it's from a breakdown that a breakthrough comes through. When something no longer works, when something gets broken, we have to start looking at our behaviours and what's going on and say, I need to change. And therefore, we need to wake them up to the impact of their actions. So let's go back upon the other people who are being impacted by these behaviours of the narcissists. I always say is through understanding comes acceptance. And maybe acceptance is not the right word here, but maybe it's about I'm able to not hold on to this stuff and not be as affected by it. So I build a degree of resilience up. And I can talk a lot about sort of, I don't think resilience is the answer, but I definitely think that people need to become more resilient. And the critical thing is, it's not your stuff. When that narcissist is having that rage or is putting you down or doing whatever, you've got to remember those three fingers I've talked about. One finger is pointing at you, but three fingers are pointing back at them, because actually what they're getting angry about, or they despise in others is really what they are despising in themselves. Be it that they think you're stupid or you're weak, it's actually them thinking they are stupid and weak. So actually the more you realise, when they're doing that, they're telling me stuff about me, about themselves, And I think there's something about, we've got to reframe and see this person in a different light. We've got to understand the fundamental issues that have gone in with the person and the damage that was done to them by damaged parents themselves. And you've got to see the hurt child inside. Who basically just wants love, to be accepted, to be prized, to be validated. All these are strategies to get that stuff. And clearly they've gone around it the wrong way, but they learn that as a kid. Who knows what's the right strategies as a kid? No one does. So you've got to put an emotional bubble around you. You've got to be sort of like the force field comes up and realise this is about them more than it's about you. And you've almost got to realise that when you're looking at the person, see the 12-year-old, 6-year-old hurt little child. And the reality is how would you treat a small 6-year-old hurt child? That's what ultimately you're dealing with here. And this may sound wrong, and I want to explain a bit. You've got to play the long ball game. Like politicians are doing with Trump and things like this. You've got to know, what's the best way of playing this person? How do I get the best out of this person for me? And so there is, as we'll talk a bit later, a lot of mirroring, a lot of sort of, good sort of commentary back to the person, because then you'll then get what you want to get. Now, confronting them is, I would suggest, not a good idea. Because actually, if you call them a narcissist, right? Oh, you're a flaming narcissist, you are. You've got to remember that at the very heart of them lies deep, deep shame. And when you chuck a narcissist at them, you are basically, because of the way the world is, identifying them as being all bad. And all you're going to do is further cement that sense of deep, worthlessness inside of them. I really am all bad. And they're either going to go into some furious rejection of this, or they are so sort of divorced from their reality, they're just going to completely deny this stuff and will then turn it back onto you. So you've got to be very kid glovish. You've got to do this in a very soft way. Now, you may say, oh God, you're being far too soft on them. We've got to get back to them. Look, absolute. But that's where you go into HR. You document everything, and if there is anything that comes up between you and them, you've got to set boundaries and be very clear about the boundaries. Now, how you feed back on boundaries is you feed back on behaviour. I'm sorry, you know, I don't feel that is quite appropriate for right now. You know, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's quite fair. What you don't do is you don't say, look, you know, you're a narcissist, because we can't fight them at identity level. Because if anyone criticise you at identity level, they will fight back at identity as well. And that's the damage. We've got to reduce it down to behaviour level, and I'll talk more of that in another session. And basically, you know, if you can, keep out of their way, or, you know, or if you do have to work with them, don't get as drawn in as much. But the last word on this is, I appreciate that you have been hurt by them, and you feel as if you've been made small by them, and you've been misjudged by them, and all those things that they have absolutely done for you. But to try to seek revenge and punish them is not the answer. You know, all it's going to do is lead to be destructive on both sides. So actually, what we want to do is to make sure that we take care of ourselves by some of those techniques I talked about, and we use HR to basically take care of him or her.